Okay, well, I'm going to get started, and as people roll in, we'll continue on. So, welcome everyone, and good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Cindy Lord. I'm a primary care PA, and I've been a PA educator for over 30 years. I am a member of the Aquifer Peer Trainer Group, and I also lead the Aquifer Peer PA Affinity Group. So, next, let's introduce our speakers. And we'll start with Akshar Dash. Akshar is an assistant professor and clerkship director of internal medicine at the University of Texas Houston McGovern School of Medicine. He's an associate editor and peer trainer with Aquifer. Nicole Furschke is Associate Clinical Professor, and she's Director of Rural Health Postgraduate Fellowship at Northern Arizona University. She's also an Associate Editor and Peer Trainer with Aquifer. And finally, Kelsey Doherty. Kelsey is Assistant Professor at the University of Colorado Child Health Associate PA program, and she is an Associate Editor and Peer Trainer with Aquifer. So, we asked you to reflect on your own challenges, and priorities on shaping how your program approaches clinical learning. And we had you look at assessment or implementation this past year. And here's what you told us. Many of you are looking for practical ways to solve real educational problems, either earlier identification of learner gaps or stronger clinical reasoning, more consistent experiences across sites, and more scalable assessment models. Successful adoption really depends on implementation clarity. So, in other words, subscribers just did not just want tools. They wanted clear models on how to use those tools effectively, efficiently, and in ways that aligned with their own curricular goals. So, building on your feedback, I'd now like to turn the discussion over to my colleague, Akshar, who will share our agenda for the remaining hour. Akshar, take it away.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I really appreciate the introduction. Thank you to everybody who joined as well. So here's the agenda that we're planning on discussing this afternoon. We are going to allow for Q&A as well, kind of towards the end of the webinar. But as we go through, please feel free to add your questions into the Q&A option at the bottom of the Zoom here as well, rather than the chat option. It's just easier for us to track the Q&A. So going into our agenda, so three things that really came up this year are what were educators trying to accomplish? Number one. Number two, what does successful aquifer use look like? And number three, recommendations going into this new academic year ahead. So one of the things that came up frequently during our peer trainer consults and curricular consults is that students rarely engage with Aquifer voluntarily unless it is required. So therefore, subscribers repeatedly asked how to make usage intentional, visible, and manageable. So a couple of issues that kept surfacing. Students deprioritized optional work when it felt disconnected from course expectations. And then what we did is that we noticed that subscribers noted assigning fewer yet high yield cases. And as a result, that shifted use from supplemental use to intentional use. And we have over 250 cases here in the Aquifer library across core disciplines. And there are new cases that were recently added in psychiatry, OBGYN, and neurology. So it can be kind of daunting to figure out where to start. Just kind of an example from us here at UT Health Houston. I'm the assistant clerkship director for internal medicine, and there's about 36 cases in internal medicine. So it was a little difficult to figure out where to start, but we ended up assigning students two cases each month that they're on the rotation with us. And we kind of tracked their use of these cases and surveyed them, and they told us that it was highly impactful. So a second thing that came up is that faculty wanted examples of manageable implementation models. So the action that we took is that subscribers connected Aquifer content completion to grading, coaching, or in-class application. And then a third thing that came up is that a workflow fit mattered. Course setup shaped whether adoption stuck. And an action that was taken is that subscribers found building courses reusable for future terms blocks and rotations, and therefore that reduced the time that they needed to put in order to select content going forward for the academic year. There's also, interestingly, a new AI assistant that was rolled out on our platform last year. And going through this AI assistant, you can go through and pick and choose different cases. And one of the curricular consults that I was a part of a couple of months ago was a faculty member from the OBGYN department at Sidney Kimmel University in Jefferson. And she was kind of trying to put together a course with some of these cases. And we guided her to using our AI assistant, and then ultimately trying to find cases that matched, for example, abnormal uterine bleeding and things like that in order to come up with high yield cases for her course. And then she was able to enroll students into that course. So another thing that was a theme from our curricular consults this year is that students might not have realized that they have content or reasoning gaps. So structured formative assessment was one of the most persistent themes that we noticed throughout the year. And there were some issues that kept on surfacing from this. Number one, programs were trying to intervene before shelf or end of rotation failure. We all want to identify those students that are at risk. And Aquifer is actually a great tool in order to do that. There's a calibrate early and late assessment model, which can benchmark areas of knowledge gaps or hidden biases during rotations or when students are participating in their clinical courses. So faculty needed scalable ways to support more learners with less time. And Aquifer Calibrate and Practice Smart provide clear visibility into these hidden gaps and help students identify weak areas and help faculty come up with a learning plan for these students. Therefore, this leads to targeted follow-up instead of generic remediation. And we also noticed that assessment was most compelling when it led directly to coaching or case assignment. Aquifer actually inspired more productive midpoint coaching conversations that was grounded in actual performance data. We also surveyed our users, and over 60% gave 4 or 5 star ratings. And they also said that in Aquifer Calibrate, the questions were of good quality and very useful for NBME shelf and other exam prep. The third theme that came up was enhanced clinical reasoning and OSCE readiness. How do we take our students from the preclinical phase of clinical education and transfer them over into the clinical phase where they are working on their doctoring skills and becoming competent clinicians? So the program said that we lean to Aquifer for building clinical reasoning, patient notes, and time management skills, which is especially relevant for OSCE preparation. And many discussions during our curricular consult centered on helping learners think more like clinicians and not just memorizing facts like they were doing during their preclinical education. So some things that kept surfacing during our curricular consults were that faculty needed tools to make clinical reasoning more visible and teachable. And Aquifer is the perfect platform for that because Aquifer cases support the development of differential diagnosis, prioritization, summary statements, and transferring that into clinical decision making. And then faculty sought tools that were tied to preclinical readiness, structured debriefing, and OSCE preparation. So what Aquifer developed in these last couple of months were these encounters called virtual patient encounters. And there's many different ways to try to implement this into a clinical curriculum, but it allows students to practice history taking with quality, breadth, and relevance to clinical encounters. And currently, there's 8 cases, and based on recent surveys, they've received actually over 80% 4 to 5 star rating with high ratings in clinical relevance, questioning technique, and communication. They're really cool, and I would encourage everybody here to try them out. There will also be more virtual patient encounters coming. The next thing that we noticed is that programs also explored ways to reduce faculty workload by using scalable feedback approaches. So these cases that included AI assistant summary statements and virtual patient encounters gave learners a low stakes, non-graded for the most part, opportunity for repeated practice. And it also did not lead to increased faculty workload. And then another theme that we noticed this year as well was aligning with competencies and standardizing uh, education throughout different learners and different environments. So the recurring theme here was that proving that implementation supported standards, consistency, and accreditation needs. And what kept surfacing during our curricular consults was that faculty consistently sought learning activities across different campuses and different sites in order to standardize this practice. And the best part is that Aquifer cases include content that can help standardization and also make sure that the experience is similar across different clinical sites. Faculty were looking to fill uneven clinical exposure with structured alternatives. And then the third thing that kind of kept surfacing during our consults is that programs sought to support accreditation conversations with participation and performance. So we developed competency maps, both for ARC-PA resource guide and then also the nurse practitioner heat map. And these are two examples of ways that we have competency maps that can give faculty and program leadership a clear rationale for Aquifer adoption and see kind of the different competency areas that Aquifer can help fill. And then we realized that when value is tied to real outcomes, internal advocacy became easier. Perfect. So we walked through the different themes that we heard this year during our curricular consults. The next part of this presentation is going to be on successful use. But before we do that, we'd love to see which of these themes feels most urgent for you as a clinical educator who's helping, build a curriculum for your students. So I'm going to launch this poll right now, and please let me know if you're not able to see it. All right, awesome. Getting those last few answers trickling in. Thank you guys very much for your participation. So I'm going to share the results of this poll. It seems like there is a kind of close tie with identify learner gaps earlier and increasing engagement with learning activities, with identifying learner gaps earlier being the outrunner here. And the interesting thing about this is this actually aligns with how formative assessment and coaching came up in our curricular consults. The number one thing that programs wanted to do was identify these gaps earlier, intervene earlier, and really help our students, pass these exams and also meet the competencies that they needed to meet prior to moving on to the next stage of their training. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and then I'm going to transition over to my colleague, Nicole Frischke, who's going to be talking a little bit more about what successful use looks like.
Thank you, Akshar. The most compelling examples of successful use that we encountered didn't start broad. They started with focus, educational problems, and workable models. As we look across consults, one of the most useful questions was not what subscribers wanted, but what successful use actually looked like in practice. Many of the strongest examples didn't begin with one sweeping rollout. Instead, they began small, one course, one rotation, one clerkship, or one pilot group. That made it easier to test the workflow, build faculty comfort, and demonstrate value before expanding. In many of those examples, Aquifer was not positioned as an extra resource sitting off to the side. It was built into the learning experience in a way that made its purpose obvious. That might mean a required case set, a formative assessment used in coaching conversations, or a structured small group activity that are tied to course goals. Another repeatable pattern was scaffolding. Programs were more successful when they adapted the implementation to the learner level rather than assuming everyone should use the full tool set in the same way. This may be a mindset shift. Successful use was less about using every available feature and more about creating a focused, intentional implementation that fit the local curriculum. Low stakes repetition gives learners a chance to practice core reasoning, communication, and decision-making skills before those skills are evaluated in a higher pressure setting. Across consults, faculty interest was strongest when Aquifer could be used to build confidence and pattern recognition ahead of virtual patient encounters, OSCEs, end of course exams, or other formal assessments, rather. From there, the next question is, when successful use showed up across institutions, what patterns were repeated often enough to be worth carrying forward? These patterns showed up across institutions even when their contexts were very different. Successful programs made the value of the work visible immediately. They did not assume that students or faculty would infer the purpose on their own. That often meant that it needed to be required integration. It also meant fewer steps, clearer framing, and better follow through. Making Aquifer required and clearly integrated leads to faculty and student success. We identified 4 patterns in users that repeatedly led to success. First, emphasize curricular integration. Programs saw stronger engagement when students understood that the activity was part of the curriculum, not optional enrichment or makeup work sitting outside of the core experience. Second, use data for coaching, not just reporting. Some of the most promising uses involved early insight into learner gaps, followed by midpoint conversations, targeted assignments, or more individualized support plans. Next, start with a manageable number of Aquifer cases rather than assigning too many at once so students can focus on the depth of learning instead of rushing through a long list. A smaller set of required cases makes it easier to complete the work thoughtfully, discuss cases meaningfully, and avoid overload. You can always add additional optional cases for students who want more practice or deeper exposure. Finally, for learners in early parts of the curriculum, it helps to show the Aquifer case, slow it down, the case by building in pause points, short summary writing, or group debriefs so that they can process the material in smaller pieces. These strategies give students time to think, check their understanding, and connect case details to key clinical concepts before moving on. Now that we've looked at repeatable success patterns, let me turn the conversation over to Kelsey to cover recommendations for the year ahead.
Great. Thank you, Nicole, and thank you all for joining today. So I think we all know we're all here, we're all medical educators, we're all really busy. And so I think the thought of adding a lot of new things to your curriculum can feel really overwhelming. So as Akshar and Nicole have mentioned already, the idea is to really start small, right? If you can come away from today with just one tangible idea, to maybe modify or enhance a session that you're already doing in your curriculum by using an Aquifer case or tool, that's really going to be a win. So many of these tools we're going to discuss here shortly are also designed to be sort of plug and play, right? So to reduce the amount of effort for the faculty to really integrate these into your curriculum. So if we begin first here with sort of our first implementation model or recommendation for the year, it's for preclinical learners. And as Nicole already mentioned, really success starts with scaffolding. So starting small, identifying areas that you can easily add a case that's already connected to something that you're doing in the curriculum. This works really well for our preclinical or early clinical settings where the value comes from pausing, discussing, and really helping students work through their clinical reasoning skills with some extra support from faculty. So these tools we're going to talk about here really hopefully make the learning feel more active and less like an isolated assignment. And all of these items that are linked here and on the next few slides are going to be accessible via the Aquifer knowledge base and under educator resources. So Aquifer has 2 tools that are listed here that can be used for case review. So the first one is the case analysis tool. This is a structured worksheet for students to complete as they're working through the Aquifer case on their own. And it's designed to really enhance the development of clinical reasoning skills, again, for those early preclinical or early clinical learners. So students, as they're working through the case, will document specific requested information in the worksheet as they work through that case. So things like epidemiology, prioritize problem cues from the patient history and physical exam. It may ask the student to come up with a problem statement, differential diagnosis, and then sort of next steps and a treatment plan. So this worksheet can then be a deliverable for the student to turn in like an assignment where they could get formative feedback, or it can purely be used in a formative way. Again, just making the case be that much more interactive for the learner. The next tool listed here is the case debriefing template. So this was created by myself and several other faculty at the University of Colorado PA program. We use this all the time. But this is really a structured format for students after they work through an Aquifer case independently. It's a way to bring them together and debrief the case. So there's both a worksheet that's linked here that the student can work through as they're working through the case, but also available on the Aquifer website is a PowerPoint debrief template. So this is really meant to be, again, that plug and play. You can use the template and use that for the debrief. So really the debrief is meant to sort of augment the student working through the case and is a great way to have rich discussions about the case. And it really can work for a small group. It can work in a large group setting. It also can be done in person or virtually. And so finally, the listed here is the preclinical playbook. This is now available, should be posted to Aquifer and the website very soon, but it's meant to be sort of a choose your own adventure guide for ways to integrate Aquifer cases and tools specifically for a preclinical learner. So for anyone that's interested in this tool right now, feel free to let us know in the chat and we can make sure that it gets sent to you. So our second model for implementation, and again, some ideas that hopefully you can come away from today with, is having required cases, but also some student choice. So in this model, faculty can assign a focused set of cases that really connects with your curriculum, is tied to course objectives or clerkship expectations, but also gives the student a little bit of flexibility and choice. So the course builder, formerly known as custom course, now offers this student choice feature that students can work through the curated set of cases that faculty have identified, but also allows them to choose some of their own. So really supports that self-directed learning and allows the learner to have a little bit more engagement and flexibility. So our implementation model idea number 3 is this idea of midpoint coaching model. So Akshar sort of already alluded to this, but the idea of using calibrate assessments as both an early and a late assessment to identify those learners on the earlier side who may be struggling and identify maybe some weak areas with the student. There's also lots of coaching resources available for this. So when the students take those early calibrates and you've identified some of those areas, what are some ways to sort of coach the student to help strengthen those weak areas? So programs were especially interested in this model because it again supported that earlier intervention and allowed for more meaningful feedback for students, either in clerkships or rotations. Great. So lastly, our implementation model number 4 is using reports to correlate outcomes over time. So again, starting small, not having to go program level yet if that feels overwhelming, but starting with one course that maybe already has a midpoint check-in, remediation process, or known weak content areas. So this might be conducive to those clerkships or rotations where an early or a late sort of checkpoint is already established. So by running an early calibrate assessment or assigning a small required case set, this allows faculty to then review those course reports or review the assessment to identify which of my learners are struggling, what content areas might they be struggling in, and is this a student-specific issue or is this a pattern sort of across the whole cohort? So then later in the block or course, you can review the next report, or you can assign maybe that later calibrate assessment and sort of ask, did the student improve? Did the cohort weak areas shift? And were there targeted cases that sort of identified and strengthened those knowledge gaps? So I think overall, what all four models sort of have in common is that they're practical, and really enhance what you're already doing in the curriculum. So again, not having to start from scratch, but starting small. What things can you add to your curriculum that really will enhance the curriculum? And hopefully will give you an answer to the question of what would this look like in my setting. And that's sort of part of why these models consistently came up across all of these curricular consults over this past year. So before we sort of move on, we want to turn the question to you. So based on what you've seen so far, which of these implementation models feels the most achievable for your program today? So if you go to the next slide, we have another sort of interactive poll that I'll launch. So again, which of these, so we talked about kind of four implementation models, which of these feels the most doable for your program today? So I'm going to launch the poll here. So thinking about a required case set, early, late formative assessments, so calibrate with coaching follow-up, sort of these small group or faculty facilitated case discussions, or just starting small with one course rotation or pilot group, or we're still earlier than this, we need some additional onboarding or orientation first. Okay, so we'll end our poll and share results here. So it looks like most people saying sort of early to late formative assessment with coaching follow-up, and then after that, required case set using Course Builder. So I think this is very consistent with what we've seen with our curricular consults over this past year, of people really having a desire to use data for stronger and earlier intervention rather than waiting for those students to really struggle, fail in end of rotation, really struggle with end of program, but try to have some early targeted interventions. And I think we've seen really the value in that. So I will stop sharing the results here. And I'm now really going to hand it over to Cindy. I think we'll kind of round out some of our closing thoughts and then hopefully leave time for people to ask some questions.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey and Nicole and Akshar. That was just great information. So just a reminder, questions, throw them in the Q&A, not in the chat. If you put them in the Q&A, we'll get to them. But as we close, the clearest message from the year is that you as educators are not just looking for content to be used as for optional intent. You're looking for tools and approaches to help solve real implementation problems. And across these consults that we did this year, the strongest demand really centered on earlier insight into learner gaps, stronger clinical reasoning skills, more consistent learning across settings, and more scalable approaches to assessment and support. So adoption really depends on clarity, fit, and a realistic path to implementation. And that the really big takeaway from this year in review was that, when the implementation model is clear, the value becomes much easier for schools to see. So start with a specific teaching or assessment problem that you want to solve, then choose the Aquifer feature or workflow that best fits your need. When the workflow is confusing, disjointed, or too burdensome, even strong interest can stall out. So this year's story is really both encouraging and instructive. The demand is there, the educational problems are clear, and the consults gave us a strong view into the kinds of support models and messaging that make successful use much more likely. So again, you can throw your questions in the Q&A, but before we do conclude, we would like to take a few minutes to have you complete the following survey. So we'll do questions, but look in the chat, and then there's going to be a QR code for you, but which should be right here. Yeah. So there's a little QR code for you, but please help take the survey. It really helps us plan for next year and helps us help you. So Mimi, do we have questions? All right, well, we will move on. So if you'd like help identifying next steps or applying this cycle within your program, the Aquifer team is here to support you. You can engage Aquifer support or consider scheduling a curricular consult. And that helps give you, really personalized guidance tailored to your goals and context. Scheduling a consultation is really quick and easy. You can just use the QR code and it takes you right to the scheduling page. You can do an individual, you can have small group, you can do a faculty meeting. We've really adopted to any of those styles, whatever works for you. And there's 15, 30-minute, hour consults. So it really is whatever, it's tailored to your needs. So we look forward to connecting with you soon and learning more about how we can best help support your curricular needs, and wish you all the best as we get to the end of this academic year and everybody off to a fresh start very soon. So thank you again to our presenters, Kelsey, Nicole, and Akshar, and to our Aquifer team who helped us with the presentation today. Have a good day.
Oh, I think there was one question,
Oh.
Cindy, that popped
Oh, did you
up.
get it? Oh, good. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Is it in the
So
chat?
yeah, it's in the
Okay.
Q&A. There's a
Okay.
couple. So
Go ahead.
do you have any suggestions for clerkship or course directors to encourage sort of curriculum-wide adoption? So we have a centrally managed curriculum, but everyone is so busy, it's hard to make the case to invest in the effort for better adoption and implementation. So I'd love to hear other ideas too. I certainly have felt this at my program as well. So one of the things I've tried to do is just to give a short sort of orientation to Aquifer to all of my faculty. And I've showed sort of tangible ways that I've used it in some of my courses. And I just took about 15 to 20 minutes at a faculty meeting. Aquifer also has great orientation slides, so I didn't have to build something from scratch. I used the slides that are already available. But I think that really helped show, oh, that's really easy. Like I run a musculoskeletal course. I found a great case on back pain and why we don't MRI everybody that has back pain. And I just added that into the course in the week that I was already teaching the students about back pain. And so I think when faculty could see sort of how easy it was to sort of do some adoption of Aquifer cases and how much it enhanced the course, I think people got on board. So I think, again, this idea of starting small, it doesn't have to be this huge curriculum-wide adoption, but can start small.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kelsey. We also, during curricular consults, we've done faculty meetings and shown examples there, had people ask questions and modeled easy first steps to implementing or integrating Aquifer into the curriculum. So that's another idea, is you might want to even start with a curricular consult. Nicole or Akshar, anything you do at your university that's helped?
Yeah, thank you guys for the answers and thank you for the question as well. So, it's hard, I think, to show where Aquifer fits into the curriculum, right? And kind of like I said before, one of the quotes that we had during our curricular consults is students don't really engage with this because they don't view it as a high yield resource, right? So how do we shift that framework over to something that Aquifer offers that other kind of resources don't? And I think part of that is largely personal identity formation, right? Going through these cases, and especially now with this virtual patient encounter, students are able to go through and ask questions and get answers from the AI kind of in real time. And it really helps them kind of, build that framework of how do I go through asking a history that's thorough, and how do I go from kind of open-ended questioning into closed-ended questioning. So I would probably try to, emphasize these new tools that Aquifer has and how that can help supplement the other things that you're doing in your clinical curriculum, Kristen.
And don't forget, there's now the test bank for students called Practice Smart. That is not the end all and be all to everything, but students do love their test banks. And the great thing about Practice Smart is that it is formative and safe space for the student, but every question is connected to a case. So they can really contextualize that question instead of just question, answer, and they end up memorizing. They can go back and see where in that case where did I miss that point? How did I not understand that teaching point? And there are great teaching points and learning guides for them. So that's another thing to maybe share.
My approach is very similar to what Kelsey shared. I have this unwritten title as the Aquifer Queen in my department, and so when we onboard new faculty or when new uh, things come out with Aquifer, I kind of host these lunch and learns with our faculty just to give a chance for people to ask questions and to really understand how some of these things can be integrated. You know, we've got access to them, we might as well use them.
Thanks. Those are great responses. Kels, were there other questions?
Not that I saw. I just wanted to add one other thing, sort of from the student side. We give students a short orientation to Aquifer right when they start at our program. And we've really found like students find their way. Like they really don't need faculty in many ways to work through Aquifer and find the resources themselves. So we do that very early on in the program to show the students we have this subscription, it's available, and show them some of the tools. And then they really are self-directed learners in many ways.
And then one final thing, I'd point back to Kelsey or Nicole. One of you talked about the case analysis tool and the debriefing template. Those are just so drop-in easy for faculty that you really don't have, you could just pick a case that you like, that you enjoy, and you can use it in the classroom. The case analysis tool, they can work on their own, or I used to use it in the classroom. I early on for early learners, put them in small group and chunk out pieces for them to do with the case and the case analysis tool. So having those tools there that you really don't have to put time and effort into makes it easier for you, and just maybe people won't be so nervous to make that step to say, I'm going to try this in my class. Okay, well, hearing and seeing no other questions, I will thank everyone for attending today. Wish you all the best. Any closing thoughts, Kelsey, Nicole, or Akshar? Anything that we missed that we want to say? And please do the survey for us.
I don't really have anything else to add. I think this was
Okay,
great. Thank you guys for joining. We appreciate the participation.
we do. And again, Mimi will send out the recording, the link to the recording and the slides. So, all right, everyone, have a great day and thank you.